I had been working as a security guard at the airport for almost 6 years. Most of my shifts were at night. People think airports are busy all the time, but that's not true. After midnight, the terminals go quiet. Shops close, flights slow down, and only a handful of red-eye passengers sit in the waiting areas, half asleep. The hum of the air conditioning fills the silence, interrupted only by the occasional announcement echoing through empty halls. I had gotten used to the routine, walking the same corridors, checking locked doors, and watching cameras in the control room. The night shifts were dull but peaceful, which suited me fine. At least, that's what I used to think. It was early December. The weather outside was icy, and flights were delayed because of storms. My supervisor assigned me to patrol Terminal C, the oldest wing of the airport. Hardly any flights used it anymore, except for a couple of international arrivals at dawn. Most of the shops there had shut down years ago. The escalators squeaked, the paint on the walls had faded, and the long glass windows looked out onto runways that barely saw traffic. That night, I remember stepping into Terminal C around 1 a.m. The place was silent, the kind of silence that makes your footsteps sound too loud. Fluorescent lights buzzed above me, some flickering faintly. A few passengers were stretched out across benches, trying to sleep. A cleaning lady pushed her cart slowly, her mop bucket squeaking on the floor. I walked the usual route, checked the side exits, make sure no one slipped past security, glanced at the cameras, nothing unusual. But halfway down the concourse, near one of the darkened duty-free shops, I noticed something odd. A chair had been dragged out into the middle of the hall. Not one of the airport chairs bolted to the floor, but a plastic one that usually stayed in the staff room. I was certain it hadn't been there when I walked by an hour earlier. At first, I thought maybe a janitor had left it, but when I asked the cleaning lady, she shook her head. "Not me," she said in a flat voice. "Maybe one of the other guards." But I knew the other guards. No one ever moved chairs out there. I pushed it back against the wall and continued my patrol, brushing it off as nothing. Later, around 2:30 a.m., I headed toward the security office to warm up with some coffee. On the monitors, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. On camera 12, which covered the stretch of hallway near gate C14, the same chair was back in the middle of the hall. I leaned closer. I was sure no one had walked past there. I rewound the feed just a few minutes. The chair was against the wall. Then, without anyone visible, it shifted. Slowly. Not a push, not a kick. It slid into the center of the hall as if someone invisible had dragged it. I called my supervisor on the radio. He laughed at first, said maybe the wheels on the chair were uneven. Maybe it slid on its own. But I knew those chairs. They didn't roll easily, not on the rough tile floors. Still, I went back out to check in person. The hallway was empty, just as silent as before. The chair stood in the center like it was waiting. I touched it. Cold plastic. Nothing strange. I pushed it back to the staff lounge, making sure it stayed behind the door. For the rest of the shift, nothing else happened. By sunrise, passengers began to trickle in for the early flights, and the terminal filled again with noise, announcements, and rolling suitcases. The night's unease faded into background noise. I told myself it was nothing worth thinking about, just a chair, nothing more. But looking back now, I realized that was the first sign. That strange night when a simple chair wouldn't stay where it belonged. And that was only the beginning. After the chair incident, I tried to put it out of my mind. Nights at the airport can play tricks on you. You're half asleep, walking empty corridors under buzzing lights, listening to echoes bounce off high ceilings. It's easy to think you saw or heard something when you didn't. But a few nights later, something happened that I still can't explain. It was just past 3 a.m., the quietest stretch of the night. I was sitting in the security office, sipping stale coffee and watching the monitors. Terminal C was almost empty again, just a few passengers waiting for the early flight to London. On the camera feed near gate C19, I saw a man standing alone. He wore a dark coat, gray slacks, and carried a small leather briefcase. He was positioned oddly, just standing still in front of the boarding counter, even though the gate was closed and no staff were there. I leaned closer to the screen. Something about the way he stood made me uneasy. He wasn't checking his phone, wasn't reading a ticket, wasn't even pacing. Just standing, facing the counter like he was waiting for someone to appear. I switched to the next camera, which showed the same area from a different angle. The man wasn't there. Confused, I flipped back to the first feed. He was still there, clear as day, his figure sharp under the cold fluorescent lights. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the screen had frozen. But no, the clock in the corner ticked forward. The cleaning crew walked past in the background. Everything moved normally, except the man. I called over my partner, Raul, who was monitoring the opposite wing that night. "Do me a favor," I said, pointing at the screen. "You see that guy by gate C-19? Raul squinted. "What guy?" I looked at him, then back at the screen. The man was still there, standing motionless. "You don't see him?" I asked. Raul shook his head. "Hall's empty, man. Look." He switched the feed on his own monitor. Different camera, same spot. Empty. I felt a cold wave run through me. It wasn't a glitch. The man was visible on only one camera. I decided to check in person. Grabbing my flashlight, I headed down the long, silent corridor toward gate C-19. The polished tiles reflected the overhead lights, and my footsteps echoed louder than I liked. When I reached the gate, the area was empty. No man in a coat, no briefcase, just rows of vacant seats and the closed boarding counter. But here's the thing. One of the seats had a newspaper on it, folded neatly as if someone had just left it there, and next to it, an old boarding pass. I picked it up, frowning. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. The date printed on it made my stomach drop. March 1998. That flight had been over 20 years ago. I carried the boarding pass back to the office, but when I checked the seat again a few minutes later on the live feed, both the newspaper and the boarding pass were gone. Raul swore I was messing with him, but I could see in his eyes he didn't like it either. He muttered something about bad wiring in the cameras and went back to his monitors, but he was quieter the rest of the night. Later, when the morning staff came in, I asked one of the older custodians about Terminal C. He gave me a strange look, then said softly, "That wing has history. Long time ago, before your time here, there was a man who collapsed at gate C-19. Heart attack. They said he was waiting for a flight he never boarded." He walked away before I could ask more. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the image in my head. The man in the coat, standing motionless with his briefcase, staring at a gate that hadn't opened for him in decades. I told myself it was just a story, just tired eyes messing with me. But deep down, I knew better. Because on the next shift, when I passed by gate C-19 in person, the air was different, colder, heavier, like the air before a storm. And for just a second, I swore I heard it, the faint, metallic sound of a boarding announcement echoing through an empty hall. But the speakers above me were completely silent. After the incident at gate C-19, I couldn't shake the feeling that Terminal C wasn't just old or quiet. It was wrong. The silence there seemed heavier than in the other terminals, like the walls themselves were holding on to something they shouldn't. I tried to ignore it, tried to do my rounds like always, but the sense of being watched grew stronger every night. Sometimes, while walking the long hallways, I'd hear the faint squeak of shoes behind me. I'd turn around. Nothing. Just my reflection in the wide glass windows. One night, around 2:15 a.m., I was checking the restricted service corridors. These are the narrow hallways behind the terminals, where staff move luggage carts, maintenance tools, or supplies. Passengers never go there. The doors are always locked, and access is limited to staff with clearance. When I reached the service door near gate C-15, my radio crackled. It was Raul again, his voice uneasy. "You near the old service corridor?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Check if the alarm's working. Motion sensors keep tripping. I'm seeing activity on the screen, but there shouldn't be anyone in there." I sighed and swiped my card through the reader. The heavy metal door clicked open. Inside was the usual dim-lit corridor, concrete walls, exposed pipes, the smell of dust and old cleaning chemicals. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, flickering every few seconds. I walked slowly, my flashlight beam cutting across stacked crates and abandoned carts. Everything seemed normal at first. Then I noticed something strange. The door at the far end of the corridor, the one that had been sealed years ago, was standing slightly open. I froze. That door hadn't been used in at least a decade. The airport had officially locked it off after a renovation, and I'd walked past it countless times. It was always shut tight, with a faded no entry sign taped across it. Now it was ajar, just an inch, but enough to see darkness beyond. I radioed Raoul. "That end door's open. You seeing anyone on your feed?" A pause. Then his voice came back, tense. "Yeah, someone just walked past the camera. Looked like a man in a coat." My mouth went dry. "Which direction?" "Toward you," he said. I turned slowly, flashlight raised. The corridor stretched empty behind me, silent except for the buzz of the lights. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "Don't mess with me, Raoul," I muttered, trying to convince myself he was joking. But Raoul's voice was shaking. "I'm not." He walked right past camera 22. He should have been at your end by now. I stared at the open door again. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer. The concrete floor was dusty, but as my light swept across it, I saw marks. Not footprints exactly, more like long scuffs, as though something had been dragged through. The air near the door was colder, sharp enough to sting my nose. I hesitated, then pushed the door wider. The darkness inside seemed too thick, like a black wall pressing back against my flashlight. I expected to see storage space or maybe another hallway, but the beam barely illuminated more than a few feet ahead. The smell was different too, stale, metallic, almost like rust or old blood. My radio hissed suddenly, loud in the silence. Raoul's voice came through, whispering now, "Don't go in there." I pulled back, shutting the door hard. The sound echoed down the corridor. When I turned, I thought for a moment I saw movement at the far end. A shadow, slipping out of sight just as my light caught it. I hurried out of the service corridor and locked the door behind me, swiping my card twice to make sure it stayed shut. Back in the office, Raoul wouldn't look at me. He just muttered, "That door shouldn't even exist anymore. They bricked it off years ago." I wanted to argue, but the scuff marks on the floor were still burned in my memory. Something had been moving through that door, something that wasn't supposed to. The rest of the shift, I kept glancing at the monitors, half expecting to see the man with the briefcase again. But the screens showed nothing, just empty hallways and sleeping passengers. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that something had slipped into the airport that night through a door no one was supposed to open. And if it had gotten in once, what was stopping it from coming back? By now, Raoul and I had stopped joking about Terminal C. We still did our shifts, like always, but every night felt heavier, like the air itself carried something we weren't supposed to breathe in. The strange part was, it wasn't just me anymore. Other staff began to complain too. Not passengers, not outsiders, just the people who worked the night shifts with us. The first to say anything was the cleaning crew. A middle-aged janitor named Marcos refused to mop near gate C-19. He didn't make a scene, just quietly avoided the area. When Raoul asked him about it, he finally muttered, "Too much noise." "Noise?" Raoul said. "It's empty down there." Marcos shook his head. "Voices, but not from people you can see, like a crowd in the bathroom stalls. When I check, no one." I thought maybe he was imagining things, maybe the echoes were playing tricks. But then his partner, a younger cleaner, confirmed it separately without even hearing Marcos's story. She said when she mopped the men's restroom near C-18, she heard someone breathing in the last stall. Heavy, slow breathing. She opened it. Empty. She wouldn't go back in there again after that night. A few nights later, it was the maintenance staff. One of the electricians told me that the lights in the closed shops near C-15 kept flickering even though power was cut to that section. He showed me a photo he took on his phone. One of the old perfume shops lit up for just a second. Mannequins inside were casting long, warped shadows on the glass, as if someone had walked past them. But when he went back to check, the lights were dead. No power at all. Even Raoul started changing. At first, he was the one cracking jokes, calling me paranoid. But now he sat quietly in the monitoring room, eyes glued to the screens. I'd catch him rewinding the same camera feed over and over. When I asked what he was looking for, he'd just say, "Thought I saw something." One night I came in and found him staring at the monitor for camera 22, the one facing the service corridor. His face was pale. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. then said, almost whispering, "Something's moving in there when the lights are off, but the sensors don't pick it up. It's only on the feed." I leaned over, watching the screen. The corridor was dark, silent. Nothing moved. I almost said he was imagining it until the picture glitched. For less than a second, the frame brightened, and in that brief flash, there was a shape at the far end. Not clear, not sharp, just a tall blur, standing too close to the sealed door. When the screen corrected itself, the corridor was empty again. Raoul looked at me, his eyes wide. "Tell me you saw that too." I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. The thing about airports is they're supposed to feel safe. Clean floors, bright lights, constant security. But in Terminal C at night, it didn't feel like that anymore. It felt like the building itself was waiting for something, watching us, testing us. And every night, it seemed to spread a little further. It was my last week on that job when things finally broke open. By then, the airport management had already cut night operations in Terminal C to a minimum. Only a handful of late flights came through, and once they were gone, the place went quiet. Too quiet. On my final night, Raoul and I were assigned to split patrols. He stayed in the monitoring room while I walked the floor. It was close to 2:45 a.m., the hour when everything usually started to feel heavier, like the air had thickened around me. I started my round from C-12, moving slowly towards C-20. The sound of my own boots echoed so sharply, it felt like someone was walking just a step behind me. When I passed the vending machines near C-16, I stopped. The lights inside flickered. A bottle shifted slightly, rattling against the glass, though no one had touched it. I forced myself not to stare, just kept walking. By the time I reached C-18, my radio crackled with static. Raoul's voice came through, tight and urgent. "Hey, stop where you are, don't move." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "I'm seeing something on camera 22 again," he whispered. "The corridor door. It's open." I froze. The sealed service corridor, the one we had locked. I turned slowly, my flashlight catching the dull shine of the metal door at the far end of the hallway. Sure enough, it was standing wide open. I raised the radio. "Did you see anyone open it?" Static hissed. Then Raoul said, "Yeah." Someone walked out. Tall, dark coat. But his voice trailed off. "The cameras. Can't keep him in frame. Every time I rewind, he's there, then he's not." I gripped my flashlight tighter and stepped back. The door stood yawning open, blackness stretching inside. The lights above me flickered once, twice. Then every light down the hallway went out at once, plunging me into darkness. I could only hear the hum of the emergency power, faint and distant. Then, another sound. Shoes. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the polished floor, not echoing like mine had. These were heavier, closer. "Raoul?" I whispered into the radio. "You still there?" No answer, just static. I aimed my flashlight down the hallway. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the open corridor door. For half a second, I thought I saw someone standing just inside. A tall shape, too still, too solid. I blinked, and the beam shook in my hand. The doorway was empty. Something inside me broke then. The need to get out, to leave that hallway behind for good. I turned, walking fast toward the brighter end of the terminal. My footsteps echoed like thunder, masking whatever else might have been behind me. When I reached the security office, Raoul wasn't at his desk. The monitors were still on, screens flickering with feeds from every camera. I glanced at them one by one, trying to spot him, and that's when I saw it. On the feed from camera 22, the corridor again. The door was closed, but just before the screen glitched, I caught one last image, not Raoul. The tall figure in the coat, standing directly in front of the camera. No face, no details, just a shape filling the frame, as if it had been waiting to be noticed. Then the screen went black. I never saw Raoul again after that night. The airport's official report said he quit without notice, walked out mid-shift. But I knew better. The next morning, I handed in my badge. I told them I couldn't work nights anymore. They didn't ask questions. Maybe they already knew Terminal C wasn't safe. To this day, I don't fly out of that airport, especially not at night. and if I ever hear footsteps in an empty hallway behind me, I don't look back.